Welcome to Windows on the World. This week I'm going to be talking to Michelle Baharia. It was World Mental Health Awareness Day yesterday, the 10th of October, and we're going to talk about the things that affect people with mental health issues and also things that affect the rest of the population as a result of what we've been talking about recently, which is all the social cleansing, the regeneration and the stuff we've been covering on the show. So Michelle, welcome to Windows on the World.
Hi, nice to meet you and nice to be here.
Well, it is. We've got a good little place here, but you've had quite a lot of experience. Can you give us a bit of your background?
Yeah, my background is I have mental health issues myself, and I have done since I was around 14 years of age, and I think that's something that's very telling. Most people will develop a mental health issue when they're quite young, and then you'll have to learn to live with it, which isn't quite the way it's described. Because it's a bit seen like chicken pox. You'll have it and it'll go away, and it isn't really like that. It's much more something that you learn to live with, and through that I set up an organisation. I founded an organisation to help people deal with their mental health issues, which has been very successful. And then at the moment we are where we are with the government, who seem to think that basically they should slash everything for mental health and people should have no services, and kind of that's where we are really, in personal independence payments, but also the whole uncertainty of everything.
We had this with the DLA, and of course this. Can you explain what these new what's it, PLPs?
It's PIPs.
PIPs,
so it's personal independence payments.
Yes.
And in order to get one, you have to score a number of points. Yeah. So people have to fill out a form. But most of the form says, can you walk 20 metres? Well, that doesn't relate to somebody's mental health who can't leave home because of high levels of anxiety, or who can't go into a supermarket because they're petrified by the numbers of people and they get really distressed. Nor does it account for the fact that somebody wakes up screaming in the middle of the night because they've got post-traumatic stress disorder, or that they have, they grind their teeth down, or, mental health is like this. It's huge, absolutely huge. And it's a bit like when it comes to physical health, we have things like chest, liver, kidneys, they're all separated out. But mental health, everything's slung in a bucket together. So you've got psychosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, all sorts of things all in one bucket, anorexia, you name it, as if everyone's got something in common. And that in itself I think is also really difficult and doesn't help when someone's filling out one of these forms, because somebody who's starving themselves to death, again, can you walk 20 metres? Probably not, you might faint. But it's not because you can't walk, it's because you've underfed yourself and you don't like yourself, and there's huge underlying mental health issues with anorexia, which just goes under the radar. And again, sometimes it's seen as an eating disorder, so taken out, so people take it out of mental health and don't realise that person needs help. There's such things as well, like people eating their skin, who pick their skin, and then they'll get huge so that's not self-harm. Self-harm is something different. There's people who pull all their hair out of their body. We're talking about a really vast number of conditions, and this form doesn't actually do it for anyone. So most people with mental health issues fail and don't get the PIP. So that means that people are losing, for a lot of people that might be £230 a week income, which that income paid for them to pay someone to go shopping, or paid for someone to help them cook a meal, or actually encourage them to eat. Because if you've got someone who's not eating, they might need to pay somebody to actually come and eat with them. And it sounds really simple, and it is simple, but because it's an issue around how they are, they will need to engage someone to do that. And the PIP form doesn't allow for that, so that person fails, and many people have either taken their lives or died in the process.
There's a huge number of disabled people were killing themselves, weren't they?
Yeah, and it's a mixture of things as well, like bedroom tax.
Yeah, Yeah, well, all this comes on top. I mean, well, what we're seeing is this massive kind of social cleansing. So the way I see it is this is coming into it. What they're doing is it's a very broad canvas that they use, and I know people who've been through this. I actually went to a tribunal with someone who is disabled,
Right.
and we won the tribunal.
Fantastic.
But I had to bring in the mental health side of it and how it was affecting him. It's a friend of mine, and I'd see him go into very deep depression after his illness, but they don't take that into consideration. You know, they were very interested in how many steps he'd taken to go to say, oh yes, you live in Putney, so yes, that's 500 steps to the tube station, and then you go down the steps, then you get into the tube, that's that many steps, and so you went this. And what they try to prove is that you can walk a certain distance, but that really does not define what the illness actually is, you know, even though his main problem was a physical illness, really, you know, but that it is a very, very draconian thing that was brought in a couple of years ago, wasn't it? I think it was Atos were originally doing it.
Well, there is Atos who were doing that, and it's quite ridiculous because also even with physical conditions, people are on a spectrum, and it may be different from day to day. Actually, you know, and there's conditions that go again under the radar, like ME.
Yeah.
So ME might affect someone mentally and physically, and you know the weaknesses that come into ME are just not calculated for in that form. There's nowhere for you to actually write your condition or how that really affects you.
So you've had quite a lot of experience of seeing how this affects people. So let's go and take a look into it as now and go back, say, 5 to 10 years. What's changed?
Well, I think we've gone backwards.
Yeah.
So we've gone backwards back to the 1980s, Thatcher's era, as if everyone was just leaving psychiatric hospital and care in the community.
Yeah.
But there's nothing in place. Because not only are the PIP a problem, the personal independence payments, but all the organisations that were running, most of them have closed. And what's being put in place is like meat factories. So they're these well-being hubs or...
We covered this quite a lot.
Did you?
Community hubs that are being put in.
Yeah.
And I've covered this quite extensively. There's an article on the site called Big Society Change Agents, but it links to how this is being implemented. And that's what I'm finding very interesting about what you're saying, because what they're doing is they're creating a kind of idea of this community. But what they're doing is they're actually erasing it, and they're putting in like a corporate structure.
That's right, and it's all run by corporates.
Yes.
So instead of where people might have gone to their local, and day centres I may have issues with, but at the same time a lot of day centres were small, they were very local, and they were usually run by local people. They usually involved people being able to volunteer in them, and they usually involved people self-directing the support they got.
Yeah.
Whereas these hubs are corporates, they're run by huge charities, and I think we have to recognise that a lot of charities are corporates. They're brand names that are corporates that have privatised sectors of what should be actually run by the council, the local authority or government. So they've taken over these hubs, and they're not self-directed, so they operate in a kind of very sort of sausage factory way. So like they'll have a recovery college, and all of the words are kind of like, you will become well, you will recover, not you live on a spectrum, how do you cope with your day-to-day life? So there's these false senses of what will happen next in the next stage of your life. You know, it's like life is a bumpy road, isn't it? Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes you go over.
So they basically give you an action plan.
Everything's a plan. Everything. You have a care plan. You have a crisis plan. You have a this plan, a that plan. But there's no one at the end of that plan because everything's been shut down. So the majority of people, me included, because I've had a lot of crisis at the moment because I've been going through a really bad time. You know, basically meeting with my community mental health team, go to the CAB. The CAB will answer all your needs because they haven't got anyone left to refer you to.
So really, there's no medical professionals that
They've
you can be
cut-
directed to.
Yeah, they have cut all the meaningful. There used to be what was called, and it's quite horrible terminology, but there used to be a lot of access to meaningful activities. Because if you're unwell, you need to be in a community with other people.
Yeah.
You need to be doing things that are positive.
Yeah.
Of course you do. But if you cut all that, then actually you plummet people into crisis, which costs you billions more. You know, I think one night in a hospital is probably around 500 quid. So, and then you've got the medication, then you've got the consultants and all of that on top. So that might go up to £1.5 grand a night, depending on what you need, what you're on. Do you need someone to watch you 24/7? You know, what's the and the apparatus that needs to be put in? And it's all very well, but like once you're out, just being dropped in a pit, what's the point of that? And it costs more. It always costs more if you need high-end intervention.
This is what we've been covering with the basically the managed collapse of the NHS, which is what's happening, and we've covered this in quite some detail. So this all ties into that. It all does tie into a bigger picture, something that without you explaining too much, I can grasp because I've looked at the other sides of it. So, what would you see as any solutions to this?
Well, I think you need to bring in prevention.
Yeah.
I think you need to bring back. I mean, oddly, the rhetoric is no health without mental health. Parity of esteem for mental health. That's very good rhetoric. Just doesn't mean anything.
Well, it's like all of this stuff, isn't it? It's like all this what I call change agent speak.
Yeah.
They have this very limited vocabulary of words that they use. And of course, we live in vibrant and diverse communities, and you start seeing this. And this is what the council actually start talking. They start talking in this code as well. I was at the council meeting when they were discussing basically the future of the Aylesbury estate, which has now been held up slightly through to government intervention, ironically, in knocking it down because they ignored the judicial review. But this is the kind of thing. It's a corporate language that's being used everywhere, you know. So when do you think this actually started? I'd be quite interested to find out what you think about that.
Well, I think it obviously started way back to Thatcher, at least. But maybe that's because that's my era, in a way, you know, that's how I grew up. So I saw a big change when Thatcher came to power. You know, because it's like, I remember when I left school and went to FE college, getting a student union card was really important.
Yeah.
And when you got your first job, you joining the union was really important.
Yeah.
It's like a badge of honour.
Yes.
Now people don't even know what a union is. So there's been a really big shift into the individual. But not only is it a big shift into the individual, it's a big shift into ownership.
Yeah.
You know, like my granddad never bought a house, but he lived in the same house for 64 years. Why did he need to buy it? He didn't need to buy it.
Yeah.
You know, and my aunt's 107, and this is really interesting. So she lived in London in a trust block of flats. So she was paying £34 a week for a one-bedroom flat under fair rent 7 years ago. So that's 2009-10, isn't it? Yeah, when she moved out. That was because she was covered by fair rent. So if her rent for a one-bedroom flat should be £35, how come one-bedroom flats are like in the region of £1,000 a month? So that's £250 a week. And I think all of that, getting rid of fair rent, getting rid of all these things that protected people, you know, and Thatcher smashed the unions.
Yes.
And that lost ordinary people a lot of power. And we had a window after the Second World War. People were in a position where they could have shot the government. We could have had a revolution. Yeah. So therefore the government put in compromise. They put in the NHS. They put in free education. And then kind of along comes Thatcher thinking, no, I want to own all this. I'm very greedy. And I do think it is a lot to do with greed. It isn't just about looking after yourself. Having excessive wealth is greed. Like all the council houses in Westminster that are now owned by one person who happened to be a councillor or the son of an MP.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. It's like, talk about lining your own pockets, and corruption isn't in it. And so that has lost all of that group of people ever an opportunity to live in that area.
Yeah, this is I think it's really escalated over the past couple of years. I mean, what we're seeing now is the destruction of all the council housing, and people, they often get the wrong idea about it. They don't understand that these places, refurbishment would have been a much cheaper option and a better option, but the reason that they're doing it is to get people off their lifelong tenancies. Because when they knock them down, the tenancy disappears. It's a much...
Well, they get a secure tenancy,
Yes.
and they get a 5-year tenancy
Yeah.
now, don't they?
Yes.
So lots of people have been telling me that now the tenancy is 5-year. And also what happens is it just disrupts people's mental health. So people I know have ended up going back into hospital. And because there's no beds, they've ended up going to a police cell first, which is really inhumane. If somebody has become psychotic because actually their whole home has been threatened, and I know people who've been well for a really long time, you know, and gone, had jobs, been holding down secured jobs, and the minute the threat comes in from the council, right, we're going to knock down your home and you may or may not get rehoused, people just lose the plot. They can't hold it together. And there's that management tool called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and shelter is the first need. So if anybody wanted to run a booming economy, they would put shelter as the first need. They would not be destroying it. And I think that's what we really see from Thatcher's time onwards. There is no proper thinking about how to run a very positive, equal country, and I think that's something very different to somewhere like Germany, or Spain, where you have much different thinking about whether people rent or the quality of education they have, regardless of their class. You know, we don't even have that, and I think all of that, it's all come from Thatcher. Cut, which increases crime. And crime happens because people have to live on their wits. You know, like Charles Dickens would write about the deserving poor who stole a loaf of bread because they were hungry. Well, we have that now. And it's 2016. That's despicable. We're one of the richest countries in the world.
Yeah, but it's being made like that for the richest people in the world, really, because that's what's happening with London. It's been completely socially cleansed, but on a massive scale. The last 2 years has been absolutely incredible what I've seen. I mean, I bring this up quite a lot because we cover it quite a lot. You know, I was living in northeast London, and that's completely been changed. It's being re-engineered, though. It's not just about the property prices going up and people being forced out. There's a re-engineering of society going on, and this is what I cover quite a lot. So yeah, it's the corporatisation probably did start in the Thatcher era, but we're into something which is much more, it's like a very well thought out psychological operation. To me, the social engineering that's involved in it is very corporate, and it's the obvious conclusion that you come to is this is a long-term plan. This is not just something that's about greed.
I'd agree with you there, because I met someone who was involved in the redevelopment of the Elephant, but he was involved in it. Now, he died about 5 years ago, and he was involved in the redevelopment of the Elephant over 20 years ago, because there was an idea that the Elephant and Castle should be the Piccadilly of the South. But not only with that, some of this engineering is very bland, and actually it will lead to a lot of violence, I believe.
Yes, I agree with you. Yes.
It is bland, and there is no individualism within it. So everywhere you go, you have the same cafes, the same restaurants. They're all corporate, so nowhere
Starbucks,
is
Costa
interesting.
Coffee. Now, what's happening as well is that the self-employed are being pushed out. Now, what you get is the council saying, yes, we want to help self-employed people, you know, we want to, but they don't. They're not being consulted, and they're being driven out. So the corporates are coming in, and yes, the idea is that the whole of Elephant and Castle, we've covered this in quite some depth because we were at the regeneration meeting there, and when I was very aware that they were using Delphi technique and all these corporate ways of basically herding people through the process without them getting involved, because they don't want public participation because the plans have already been drawn up. So down in the Elephant and Castle, that's now going to be something like one huge shopping mall from Peckham down to Old Kent Road. You know, it's all planned. And the whole of London is like that. For instance, if you go to Tottenham Court Road now, the new station, that looks like, all that area now looks like it could be Croydon. Do you know?
Which is really bland and boring. And Croydon's really violent. You do not want to get caught in Croydon at the wrong time of night.
You've brought up something really interesting there. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with my guest Michelle Baharia, and we're talking about the re-engineering of society and what's happening, especially to people with mental health problems. We've discussed how things are changing with local authorities and a more corporate structure is being put in place. So welcome back.
Yeah, nice to be back. And like we said, we're talking about social engineering, but also how that affects suicide.
Yeah.
And how that brings about, because obviously we're in England, and England has a particular type of culture, so a lot of people internalise what's going on, and things like bedroom tax for sure brought up suicide, and people took their own lives, which, you know, if we go back historically, we will know in parts of what are perceived as good parts of Europe, women were, their fertility was cut off. I can't think of the word.
Yes, sterilisation.
Sterilisation
Yes.
programs, yeah. But the Nazis were really into their eugenics, and actually some of the cuts in benefits have exactly that effect.
Yeah, well, eugenics was a British thing, really, wasn't it? The study of eugenics.
Originally, I believe.
And what we're seeing is this, as I say, re-engineering, and it does appear as though there is a genocidal program in place, really. I mean, the actual results of what's happening. I mean, if these things are being thought through, and they obviously are at a very high level, on a very psychological level, then that has to, the intended outcome has to be that. It can't really be anything else, can it?
No, and also since this government came to power, I've actually personally lost 48 friends, not all to suicide, but some people have died due to losing benefits, therefore not being able to pay carers.
Yeah.
And living in remote parts of the country, friends couldn't go there and help someone who's a wheelchair user who was actually lying in their own wee and poo basically, and then dying in their bed because they starved, and that was due to a benefit cut. Things like this in 2016, when a society loses morality and it's okay for a disabled person to be cut off from benefits so they die, or even like lots of wheelchair users have been thrown out of their wheelchairs on buses and kicked, and disabled people have been scapegoated as being the cause of the problem for the bankers.
That's right. Well, they're saying that we can't afford to pay out all these benefits and all a bunch of scroungers, and that's a huge thing that's in the papers, isn't it? So you've got this guy, who says he's been claiming DLA for 20 years and he's been going to work every day, and they keep pumping these stories out, And
actually, lots of disabled people could work if you gave us access to work, but they've cut access to work. And access to work actually means that quite often more people get employed, because a lot of disabled people need a personal assistant. So actually, rather than having lots of people unemployed, you could employ more people. But they don't want to think like that. They just want to think about people being scapegoated and being called scroungers. And for people with mental health issues, you'll have somebody who maybe hallucinates, and they'll be watching the telly, and the telly will be telling them they're a benefit scrounger. And if they internalise that, they may then take their life. And that's really alarming that nobody is actually cottoning on to that. You have all these programmes that supposedly put out health messages, subtly, supposedly EastEnders. I don't watch television precisely for that reason, but I hear about that. And you just think they're all really irresponsible in the fact they do not talk about our morality over disability. Anybody can become psychotic. If psychosis is caused by trauma and anything like that, then anyone can become it.
It looks to me as though they're actually encouraging this to happen, so that it's destabilising society, so people are going to get more and more afraid, and there's going to be more and more crime. It's almost like crime is being farmed. I mean, I don't say that lightly. I know that the police really, their new policies are really about creating the crime so they can solve it. So you've got a huge amount of crime going on, and we have the statistics all being kind of massaged, and we don't really know what's going on. We're given a very childlike view of what's really happening in this country. But when you actually find out, people like yourself or the people that come on the show, and looking, basically, if you look outside the mainstream media, it does look as though everything's being completely re-engineered in a certain way, and that's the only conclusion that I've come up with, and it seems to follow the pattern of what I've been looking into, the re-engineering of society into this kind of it's a new kind of feudalism, but you're going to have a sort of parts of London which are totally inaccessible to anybody else, and it looks as though that's what they're creating. And this blandness of culture, so that there's no individuality. That's what I found really depressing about it, is all the interesting places that used to be here are going or gone.
Well, most of them are gone, haven't they?
Yeah.
And you've got windswept piazzas, which are very humanless and very greenless.
Yeah.
So, contrary to the fact that we know our well-being is enhanced by grass and trees and flowers, we're putting in concrete piazzas that are windswept because you get a wind tunnel from the buildings, and unlike New York, our roads are too close together, so actually you get it a lot worse if they become colder because of all the shadow. But then you end up with the dehumanisation and the fact that people then are in very sterile environments, and people will break out. And you kind of, you feel that tension in a lot of places, and you can't just have shopping. Our only leisure time cannot be shopping.
Or Costa Coffee or Starbucks.
Yeah, but Costa Coffee is almost like a drug, isn't it? So even the language in coffee shops, a hit of coffee.
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because a friend of mine was a manager of one of those places, and he was saying, it's like a drug. They're banging on the door in the morning, but it's not just because it's coffee, it's because it's a certain type of coffee, they're getting addicted to it because of that. But it's so...
It's acting like an opium den.
It is.
At a kind of metaphorical.
Absolutely, yes, that's right. And of course, these are going to be the controlled ones that you can go into. You see, and but it's interesting, because what they're doing is I see these places being created, like Croydon. They've now got a place called Box Park, which is actually a load of shipping containers stuck on top of one another.
Everywhere's got one.
Everyone's getting them, and they
Brick Lane.
Yes.
Elephant and Castle.
I was at a festival called Boomtown, and there was a whole, they built a city, and there was a whole area of it downtown where it got more and more kind of slummy, even though this is a film set kind of thing. But it's all containers, and so you're going around these. It's really dark, and you go through these containers, and something's happening, and it's very sort of dystopian kind of thing. But that's actually happening. So we are seeing this strange re-engineering of places going on, and I've noticed that the places are getting a lot more forbidding. There's a much worse atmosphere in these places that are being regenerated, especially on the centre of London, actually, because that used to be quite a buzzy sort of place, and it's not like that anymore. It's got a gloomy feel, hasn't it?
Well, you didn't have to have money. Yeah. Now you have to have money, because everything is about eating out, eating this pretty crap street food, really, trying to emulate some sort of Asian kind of culture with street food that we don't actually have. And kind of, and on the other hand, public health are like, everyone's getting diabetes type 2, and people are eating all this food full of what, and they're all the same. Brick Lane is exactly the same as Borough Street Market, and then exactly the same as somewhere else, and it all becomes really boring, and you lose the fact that people used to visit places because they were interesting, and all the new builds are exactly the same. You get on the overground, it's no different if you're in Stratford than if you're in Peckham.
That's the idea.
The new builds are the same, they're ugly. And you don't know where you are. There's
homogenisation of culture is going on everywhere, exactly, and we've discussed that in the show today. So, would you like to just wrap up with your thoughts on what would you advise people to do if they're in a vulnerable situation?
What would I advise people to do if they're in a vulnerable situation is actually go to A&E. Note, not to your CAB, but go to A&E, talk to a doctor there, and actually get some help. And don't leave A&E until you have. That's even more important.
That's a really good
because-
place to leave that, and quite a lot to think about there. So
Yeah.
thanks a lot, Michelle. Will you come back on again?
Yeah, I will.
That'll
yeah.
be great. Okay.
All right.
That's it from Windows on the World. We'll see you soon.